They mocked the humble farmer for his old clothes, until he bought the dealership and silenced everyone. They laughed at the farmer's old clothes, but his truth shocked everyone. Stay tuned, and don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. The dealership showroom gleamed under bright lights. Salesmen in sharp suits laughed loudly near the front desk, their watches flashing almost as bright as their smiles. Into that polished world walked a man in faded overalls, boots worn from years in the fields, and a hat so dusty it looked like it belonged in another century. He paused just inside the door. The chatter softened, then picked up again, this time with a smirk. "Sir, tractors are down the street," one salesman said, holding back a chuckle. Another whispered, "Lost farmer, must have taken the wrong turn." The old man ignored them and ran his calloused hands gently along the sleek hood of a brand new pickup. His eyes softened, not with envy, but with quiet admiration. "Can I help you?" asked the youngest salesman, though his tone made it sound more like a dismissal than an offer. "These trucks are pretty expensive." The man smiled warmly. "I know what they cost, son. I just wanted to see it up close." Snickers followed him as he shuffled toward the office. To them, he looked like someone who couldn't afford the air inside the showroom. But what they didn't know was that this man, James Miller, wasn't just any farmer. For decades, while others chased city jobs and shiny careers, James stayed on his family's land. He woke before dawn, sowed crops, raised cattle, and sold fresh produce at fair prices, never overcharging, never cutting corners. People laughed at his old truck, at his patched clothes, but James never cared. His worth wasn't in appearance. It was in the soil he worked, the lives he fed, and the community he quietly held together. Years of hard work had turned his small farm into the largest supplier in the county. And without fanfare, he had become one of the wealthiest men in town. Standing in that dealership, James remembered how his late wife always told him, "One day you should buy yourself a brand new truck, not because you need it, but because you deserve it." So he looked at the salesman and said calmly, "I'd like to buy one." The salesman raised an eyebrow. "Sir, with all due respect, trucks like these aren't cheap. Maybe we can show you something used?" The other employees chuckled again. One even whispered, "Probably can't afford a tire, let alone the whole truck." James didn't get angry. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded checkbook. He scribbled a number, tore the page, and slid it across the desk. The room went silent. It wasn't a check for the truck. It was for the dealership. The entire dealership. The manager's jaw dropped. The salesmen who had been laughing just minutes before stood frozen, their smirks wiped clean. James spoke in the same humble tone as before. "I'll take the truck. But more than that, I'll take this place. From now on, when a farmer walks in with dirt on his boots, you'll treat him with the same respect you'd give a man in a suit. Because, let me tell you something, without farmers, none of you would have food on your tables." His words hung in the air, heavy with truth. By the next week, James owned the dealership. The employees who mocked him were given a choice: stay, but change their ways, or leave. Some stayed, humbled. Others walked out, too proud to learn. And James? He drove off the lot in a brand new truck, the sun shining on his weathered face. Not because he needed to prove himself, but because he had shown everyone that dignity isn't measured in clothes, money, or status. It's measured in character. Months later, people whispered a different story about James Miller. Not the man in old clothes, but the man who reminded an entire town that humility is strength, kindness is wealth, and real success is never about showing off. It's about lifting others up while you climb. So the next time a humble man walks through a shiny door, think twice before you laugh. Because sometimes the richest hearts beat beneath the simplest shirts. And James Miller's story, it became less about trucks and dealerships, and more about a timeless truth: respect everyone. You never know whose kindness or quiet power you're standing in front of. The townsfolk were buzzing for weeks after the news spread. Some couldn't believe it, others admitted they weren't surprised. After all, James had always been different, steady, reliable, never one to brag. He didn't buy fancy cars, he didn't build a mansion, and he never once wore a suit. He poured everything into his land and into people. Neighbors remembered the countless times James had given away food when a family couldn't pay, or when he showed up at someone's door after a storm with firewood and blankets. They recalled how he always tipped waitresses generously, even though he ate at the same small diner where he ordered the cheapest meal. Now, owning the dealership didn't change him. James still wore his patched overalls, still waved at everyone he passed on the road, still knelt in church on Sunday mornings. The only difference was how others looked at him now, with respect, not mockery. One afternoon, a young boy with holes in his sneakers and worry in his eyes walked into the dealership. The same salesman, now humbled, greeted him kindly, but James himself came over. "Looking for something, son?" he asked. The boy shook his head shyly. "No, sir. I just wanted to see the cars. My dad said we could never afford one, but I wanted to dream a little." James knelt so their eyes were level. He smiled gently, remembering how he once dreamed the same way. Dreams are important, and sometimes they take longer to come true, but they do come. That day, James gave the boy and his father a ride home in his shiny new truck, laughing and talking as if they'd been family all along. It wasn't about showing off. It was about reminding people that kindness was worth more than gold. James had silenced the laughter, yes, but more importantly, he'd opened hearts. And in that small town, where people once judged a man by his clothes, they began to judge instead by the measure of his soul. Because James Miller taught them a lesson no book or classroom ever could. True wealth isn't about what you wear, or even what you own. It's about what you give, how you treat others, and the legacy of kindness you leave behind. And long after the shiny truck grew old, his story remained new in every telling, passed down like a treasure, a reminder to respect every person, humble or not.